Hello and welcome to another video. In this video I have these 5 Galaxy J5 2017 phones and I'll see how many of these I can fix. None of these phones display anything on the screen, but they do seem to power up, or at least there's some life left in them, so I'll see if display replacement will fix these phones. However, Samsung likes to put AMOLED screens in even their budget phones often, and this complicates the display replacement. AMOLED screen replacements are so expensive that it's not worth repairing these old budget phones using an AMOLED replacement screen. There is a solution for that problem, which is LCD or TFT cheaper replacement screens for phones which originally had AMOLED screens. So I'll be using cheaper TFT screens for these phones. However, the cheaper TFT screens are thicker than the original AMOLED screens, which causes an ugly gap to remain between the phone's frame and the screen. Sometimes the problem is fixed with a custom bezel or frame, like you see in this picture with a OnePlus 3. So there is a custom thicker bezel that takes into account the thickness difference of the screens. In this case you don't need to worry about the thickness difference of the replacement screen. However, with budget Samsung phones you usually don't get this custom bezel or frame, so there will be a gap left between the phone and the screen. So in addition to fixing those 5 Galaxy J5 phones, in this video I'll also show a couple tricks I've learned in order to get rid of that ugly gap, and I'll also show how to apply this to other Samsung models than the J5 2017. So before I'll get fixing those Galaxy J5s, I'll show you the idea of what I plan to do with some other phones. So here we have 2 Galaxy A5s, and the gold one is original screen and the black one is a TFT replacement screen that's not yet been installed into the phone. And here you can see the problem. There's a gap between the glass and the frame, and actually the visual one is the least of all problems that this causes. Here you can see a Galaxy A3 that I tried to fix in an earlier video, and I didn't yet know about this problem. I kinda ignored it and decided to live with the gap, and this is the same phone after about a year of use. So because of the gap you can't use a phone case, and this phone has been damaged. Also the buttons don't work properly because of the gap. So I had to come up with something to fix the problems caused by the gap. And there's my solution for the problem. You can see this Galaxy A5 has a cheap LCD, but it doesn't have any gap. And what I did with it is I got some silicone rubber sheets and used them to fill the gap basically. So I got some different thicknesses of these rubber sheets, and I use the thickness that best fits with each phone and screen. Usually half a millimeter thickness works best, but with this specific TFT screen I used 1 millimeter. Also the buttons can be fixed with the same method, and there's a Galaxy J5 2016 I think. I used a piece of a rubber sheet to make the buttons work, and now they do perfectly. And I very much recommend to get a rubber sheet that has adhesive on one side of it pre-applied. That'll save you a lot of headache. So that's the theory of how I'm planning to fix these budget phones on a budget, and let's get back to these Galaxy J5s. This one had a black frame and blue screen, so it's been replaced before, and it was therefore easy to get that screen separated from the phone. But on these other phones it's really difficult. I tried to be as careful as possible, because on 2 phones, including this one, the screen was very clean, and I thought that possibly the screen might be fine with the other parts of the phone being broken, or then maybe the display cable has just been separated from its socket. So I tried first to take these displays off without damaging them, but I found that next to impossible, at least with my expertise and my tools that I have available, because it turned out that the whole AMOLED screen area is glued to the frame, so it's not like the usual that there's only glue on the edges of the screen. While all of the AMOLED panels themselves were totally ruined, I didn't crack the glass itself. So let's first install a new power button into this one J5 that had a different color frame. After taking out a couple of screws, the mid-frame lifts off the metallic back panel, and after dislodging the power button mechanism and ribbon cable, we can install the new power button and test that it clicks properly. Now that that's been fixed, let's move to another J5, and this one has a shattered camera lens, so the process with this one is the same as with the previous. So I separated the screen using heat, and after that I took the mid frame out of the phone, and after that I had access to remove the camera lens itself, and I removed it with a screwdriver, and I used B7000 glue to glue in a replacement camera lens, and the lens of the flash on this phone is actually a different part and it's plastic, and I needed to transfer that separately. Next I needed to fix these buttons, and I thought it would be the same thing as with the A5 and A3 and previous phones I had fixed, but it turned out that on this Galaxy J5 2017 the buttons work very differently. They are not attached to the board with a flex cable like on the A5. Instead, they are separate parts, and there are holes in the mid-frame through which the buttons contact the motherboard. So I thought that if I just cut a hole into the rubber piece through which the button can contact the motherboard, maybe that would be enough to make the buttons work. So I tested the buttons and I plugged in the LCD screen, but I quickly found out that this doesn't yet fix the issue. Here you can see that the back button press was very hard to trigger, for example. So I needed to continue trying to come up with something to get the buttons to work. Next thing I tried is to apply a tiny blob of solder into the contacts of the buttons, but I didn't deem that solution to be a reliable one, because the contact still needs to be an even surface for it to work reliably. Next unorthodox method I came up with was just to cut pieces of the solder wick and solder them onto the buttons. I found that the buttons did work much more reliably now, and I declared that fix a success. Now that the problem with the buttons not working has been fixed, we can move to the next problem, which is the gap between the screen and the frame itself. I cut tiny slices of the rubber sheet and I put them in places where it would help to create a seal between the screen and the frame so that there wouldn't be a gap left. I also put them around the buttons so that they would stay in place. I also put them around the microphone and speaker so that dust wouldn't get through that hole into the front camera, for example. After making sure that there's no shards of glass or old adhesive left on the frame, I moved to prepare the new LCD for installation. Since the side bezels of this phone are so thin, I didn't put any rubber sheet pieces on the sides of the screen. There might be some backlight bleed from the sides, but that shouldn't matter other than being a visual imperfection. Before installing the display permanently on the phone, I tested everything that I could. The green screen here means that the proximity sensor is triggering, but that shouldn't be an issue when the screen is glued down properly. I also tested the cameras and everything seemed to work, so I could move forward with properly installing the screen on the phone. Here I have one I already fixed, and as you can see, I did crack the glass on that one a bit when I did apply rubber bands to hold the screen on the phone. So this time I'll try to learn from that mistake and not tighten the rubber bands as much. I will also apply the screen protector on the screen before installing the screen permanently, so that would also protect it from cracking. And even with the screen protector on, everything worked and the buttons also did trigger properly, so I could move forward with the installation of the new LCD screen. And I used B7000 glue as usually. With the part where there's the front camera, I was very careful trying not to apply too much glue, but still enough to create somewhat of a seal between the edge of the glass and the frame. I kept the phone powered on during the installation of the screen, so that if there was any problems I could detect them and still try to fix before the glue dries. But everything seemed to work, so I just applied the rubber bands and more carefully this time, and then I left the glue to dry. While the glue is drying on that one phone, I'll show another issue the thicker LCD screen causes, which is that some phone cases won't fit anymore. With this specific case, I ended up cutting around 2 millimeters from the case, so it needs to be trimmed a bit in order to fit with the new screen. It's pretty important that I don't trim the edge of the case too much, because then it won't protect the phone as much or it won't stay in the case at all. But also if I trim the case too little, it will tear the screen apart from the phone when you try to put the phone in the case. So while this was very tedious, I'm quite happy with the end result. And after replacing the screens on all 5 Galaxy J5 phones, all of them did work, so apparently it was just the screen that was the problem with them. While making this video I also got a 6th J5 2017, so now I have 6 of them. I also have other budget phones I've fixed and I'm planning to donate all of those to a charity. I'll make a video about that later. Here's a Galaxy J6 2018 that I've prepared for cheap LCD screen installation. Sometimes there may be rubber pads like this pre-applied on a phone, and replacing these with pieces of tape can sometimes give additional clearance if on the replacement LCD there is some component that is thicker than the corresponding component was on the original screen. Sometimes the replacement screen fitting or not also comes down to that. Before repairing these J5s, I also used the same method with J6 2018s and A5 2017s, and what I learned from those is that you should always use a rubber sheet that has adhesive pre-applied. Also, it's better to cut the rubber sheet into smaller pieces. Also, rather use a rubber sheet that's too thin rather than one that's too thick. And it's better to leave the side edges without any rubber sheet pieces because they are more likely to mess up the installation. It's enough to put some pieces on the top and the bottom part of the frame.